Hey there, podcast buddies. How you doing today?
How you doing, Roxy? You all right over there?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm just trying not to spike our sound levels with my cackling laughter straight out of the gate. I'm well. How are you two ladies holding up?
Oh, I'm wonderful. I'm so happy to be chilling with you guys. This is awesome.
I'm excited to get into this episode.
Oh, this is a cool one.
Yeah. My favorite part about recording is that the way we've set this up is none of us watched the next episode yet. And I let myself watch it as soon as we finish recording. And it's like so exciting for me right now because I'm like, I can't wait to talk about this and then go watch the next episode. Mm-hmm. So it does keep that suspense alive because I thought getting the screeners would kind of ruin that, but it doesn't.
We've told ourselves that we want to be able to record each episode without knowing what's happening in the next. So it keeps it extremely, extremely exciting. I love my Mondays now because now I have nothing else to do. I sit down, I watch the episode 3 times over. I'm just immersed in every single aspect of it. Get to spend all this time gushing and talking about it with you too. It's wonderful.
I do have thoughts on one that are really pertinent. We didn't really talk about Esther and how much of a feminist icon she was biblically. I was thinking about it. After I watched the first time, I was like, ooh, Esther, I know that is something because for, 30 seconds about 15 years ago, I thought I was going to become Jewish. I remember Esther was cool, but then I couldn't remember why she was cool because I completely forgot everything I learned. But anyway, I'm looking up Esther in the Old Testament. And so Esther first appears as one of the young virgins collected into King Ahasuerus' harem as a possible replacement for Vashti, his wife, who had been banished for not following his orders. And she is painted as compliant and meek, and she keeps her husband in the dark about the fact that she's Jewish. And when she learns that her people are going to be slaughtered by her husband because her uncle Mordecai pissed off the wrong prime minister, whose name was Haman, she needs to do something about it. Her people are going to be slaughtered. But she's freaking terrified because no one goes before the king without being summoned. The penalty for that was death, and his last wife was banished. She's got good reason to be afraid to take action. So honestly, Vashti was kind of her inspiration because what she does is she arranges a dinner with her husband, the king, and the prime minister. And at this dinner, she reminds her husband that not only has her uncle Mordecai been really loyal to him, but that his prime minister has been plotting to slaughter the Jews. Oh, and by the way, babe, I'm Jewish. So the king strips Haman of his power and basically all is somewhat right in the world again. And so this resulted in the festival of Purim, which is almost like the Jewish version of Halloween. That's how a friend described it to me. It's celebrated on the 14th of Adar, which is usually late winter, early springish. And there's costume wearing, drinking, and fun. But the whole Vashti thing is important too, because you could almost say that June is the Vashti in this situation, because she's the renegade. She's the first person to defy her husband and to just defy patriarchy in general. And she really, really does kind of inspire Esther to take on that task herself, which is exactly what we saw in this episode. It really is.
Thank you for summarizing that so much better than I would have.
All right, well, let's get into it. We kind of pick up a little bit after we were left off. June is leaving the scene of the execution of sex abuser Pogue, and the pigs are cleaning up what's left.
Yes.
Oh, man, I love it. Roxy, you told me about that once, and I'm like, thanks for that tip.
Of course.
Not that I'm going to kill anybody.
But if you must kill someone, first off, as Esther did point out in the last episode, all life on a farm is sacred. And that's including the life of a pedophiliac rapist. It'd be a shame to bury him and waste him, so you can make fantastic pig feed, and pigs will eat every single last morsel. Everyone's useful in a resistance. Some people know how to make nightshade poison. Some know how to get rid of a body effectively.
And some make excellent animal food.
Thanks, Vogue.
Right? So someone is here and they're scared. And she and Janine see Esther shaking hands with a guardian. June goes into kind of full Aunt Lydia mode because she is doing that thing where she takes Janine under her wing and she is convincing her to be calm, and she says, good girl. And that kind of bothered me. I could see saying it to Esther. But when she does it to Janine, and I understand that Janine responds to it, I just can't get over that infantilization. It just bugs the crap out of me.
Agreed. And she does it to a point as well with Brianna. Now, Brianna, I'm willing to give a little bit more of a pass her interactions than with Janine. With Janine, we have seen Aunt Lydia manipulate Janine over and over again in that exact same way that you mentioned. Brianna, I mean, obviously there has been manipulation there, but there hasn't been as much of a focus on it. Scarlett, you had said that in the last episode, that Brianna's not used to being in these sort of situations, so she does need that guidance. So in episode 1, we saw it with June calming her down, and here we see it immediately with June ushering Brianna to go and giving her some sort of sense of direction and giving her something else to focus on. And that moment, it felt like June was stepping into the leadership role, but then when she leaned really into that good girl with Janine and telling her, like, stay calm, keep working, good girl, you know what you're doing, it did feel partially infantilizing, but also too eerily similar to Aunt Lydia to not know.
I know. I definitely had those same feelings of like, oh, I don't like the way she says that. But I agree with you that that's just what she responds to. So in this moment, I get it in this situation as much as I didn't like it.
Did either of you find it peculiar that Esther was shaking those guardians' hands as well?
I thought that was interesting, huh? I didn't expect that. I was shocked that they would give her that kind of respect.
Right.
I think it was twofold. I think it's understood that Commander Keyes is in failing health. So Esther is definitely running the show. But I think it's also an understanding of, hey, we may or may not be part of the Guardians or the Eyes that have raped you. So we're going to give you like the hat tip in person, and we're going to be as respectful to you as we can because we know that we fucked up. I mean, not that men are ever held accountable or held to task in this world, but to me it was one of those like, all right, play along with this because we've already stepped outside of the bounds of what's acceptable in Gilead.
The only reason that I think that they weren't any of the Guardians involved with raping Esther is because I feel like if they knew what went on in that farm, they would be looking a lot harder for Pogue there and going to question those Marthas on the first trip. Because that would be like house number 1. Like, oh, we know Pogue goes there all the time. Because they kind of just moved on and didn't at least insist to go talk to those Marthas while they were bottling cider, I'm guessing they are at least on the straight and narrow when it comes to Gilead laws.
That's a good point. One of the Guardians did say, I'm embarrassed to say that this has happened before with Commander Pogue. Had they been privy to that, then they probably would have not been so keen on that information. They would have already assumed that she would know that. Yeah, that was very peculiar, though, watching the handshake go down.
Glad you caught on to that. I didn't know if it was worth mentioning. It just really did strike me as peculiar. But she is a goddamn smart child. Because Esther offers them lemonade in the house. They have that conversation about Pogue, and Mr. Keyes is sitting down, you know, listening, not listening, who the hell knows, but he just starts banging his cane again. And Esther immediately pours him something, and she's like, it helps with his pain. And they want to talk to the Marthas, but then they're going to skip it because Marthas are bottling cider. I'm like, wow, that's courteous of them. They are not very thorough, are they? I just wonder, like, how many of these Guardians actually care? Like, remember when June got left at the mansion so she could give birth alone, and they basically took Nick and then went on the run for it? Didn't just go in the house? Like, you know, like Roxy said, secure the friggin' perimeter. What is going on? They didn't secure shit. They just picked up Nick and left.
Given that they know Pogue's track record, they might not be taking it that seriously at this point. They're probably like, oh, he's going to turn up drunk in some stable somewhere, but we got to make the rounds.
Yeah, he's in a stable somewhere.
I did find it, like, obviously, like, Esther is giving him something to drink, and then, but I found it bizarre that she would volunteer, oh, this is for his pain. They weren't questioning her giving him a drink. She was getting ahead of it, but that can also be seen as premature nerves when someone's guilty of that sort of thing. So as soon as she said that, I was like, what do you want about, darling? Because it's really not that unusual for like an ailing person to be given a drink by someone if they are like banging their cane. Just be like, oh, here you go, sip, done. Like there doesn't have to be a discussion about it.
It's probably both, because she's probably never had to give this to him to, you know, I guess we find out to kind of keep him stupid and out of it. She's probably never had to do it in front of somebody. So she feels like she has to justify what she's doing.
In any event, these kind guardians say that they will leave the Marthas to their duties. They'll come back another day for questioning. Very unthorough of them, but also perfect because it gives them time, or it gives our heroes time to plan. Everyone leaves. Commander Keyes waddles off. June ducks in, and immediately Esther's looking for some sort of approval. How did I do? It's so darling, and just June, of course, responds with, great, you did great. Esther's relieved of this, but then she immediately wants to know, like, what does it mean that they came here? Like, it means that they're going to keep coming back until they find Pogue. I know that she's a young kid, but she's a very smart kid. She should be smart enough to at least figure out that part of this question.
I think it was a leading question. I think she does know what it means, and I think she wants to know what June's thinking about it, and specifically if she's leaving. It caught me off guard by the time we get to the part in the episode where Esther begs to be taken with her, because it just hadn't really occurred to me that any other option would happen, because in my mind, like, of course June's taking her, because how could she leave her? But I guess she really just wants to cut to the chase of what's the next step, and don't you dare leave me here.
I took it a different way. I thought it was more like, I think we had talked about it the last episode, how she's been isolated and she hasn't really had to act in a Mayday capacity at all. We don't know what she's been up to prior to this, but seeing as how she just literally thinks June is like the only Mayday representative there is, like all of a sudden walked into her house like a god, it just, it seemed kind of like naive. And I'm like, well, she hasn't really had to do anything. And so when she says this, like, what does it mean that they came here? I think that's what I meant, is that she just doesn't have experience navigating this yet. She hasn't really had to deal with consequences of like her actions.
Yeah.
She never really does anything.
That's a good point.
She does what she should.
Mm-hmm.
June has faced all the consequences, and this poor young person is just like, what the hell do we do now? Like, hold on. That's how I took it.
That is a good point, though, is that very rarely are teenagers able to put together the consequences of certain actions and understand the ramifications of an authority figure coming in and then saying they're returning. And having never been in this situation before. Yeah, you're right. I might have been a little bit quick to say that she should at least understand that something is going to shift. Did you two notice that when June and Esther were talking as well, June went to take the glass away from Esther to bring it away, and Esther pulled it back closer to her?
Yeah, it didn't jump out at me at all when I first watched it, but on my rewatch I was like, oh, that was so subtle, because it really just feels like she's not giving it to her because she wants an answer. It just fits so seamlessly into the scene that way, but on the rewatch I'm like, oh, she doesn't even want her to touch the glass.
So after this, June has to reassure the others that the plan is the same, and we know we have to leave sometime. Apparently, they need to get to Mayday out on the Western Front. Did they mean Chicago? Did she say Chicago, or did she just say Western Front?
She says the Western border.
So Alma is like, fuck that. Let's go to the Republic of Texas. Man, I find it like kind of funny that this is a thing. I bet you like if there was ever a Texas secessionist that was watching this, they'd be like, yes, we finally got our wish. But I'd be like, yeah, no, not like that. No, you did.
Not the way you wanted.
June's like, we can't go all that way on a rumor. And I'm kind of like, didn't you guys kind of like just do that? Everything about Mayday is a series of rumors.
The takeaway for me when June said that we can't go all the way to Texas on a rumor wasn't you can't go on a rumor, but just you can't go 3,000 or 2,000 miles on a rumor. They're taking chances every time they go 13 miles down the road. I think that that's what June was trying to say, is like, she appreciates the big picture that Alma's trying to go for, but you've got to break it down into tiny, chewable, bite-sized pieces. Go one step at a time, because it'll be very easy to get ahead of yourself. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's probably because June has experience with almost getting across the border, with her time having to be at the Boston Globe and then getting moved to another location and then another, and it all happens in steps, and she's never privy to any part, or was never privy to any step along the way, and that was both for her protection and the protection of everyone else involved. So everything is sort of built on rumors and trust, but I think that that's all that June was trying to say, is like, let's get out of here first and get to a more safe spot so we can reevaluate from there. But yeah, Brianna,
oh, that poor girl. Her poor face. I'm like, oh.
Just when she said, I don't want to fight, that broke at my little heart, but it doubles down on everything that we were saying. In the last episode, when June goes into the barn and sees everyone dancing around, and you've got Grateful Dead playing in the background, and we talked about how that was basically foreshadowing that some of these girls are eventually not going to want to follow where June is going. And Brianna, next episode, is the first to stand up and say, I don't want to fight.
Yeah, and June turns her whole body and looks her right in the face and says, none of us wanted to at first. And that's the hard truth that Brianna has to hear at this point is, you're going to have to figure it out because here we are.
Taking action to change your situation is terrifying.
It's also what this regime needs in order to continue to control. If everyone is, if that's what they want you to be afraid to fight back because you're afraid of what's going to be retaliated against you and anyone else at all. And it's definitely something we've talked a lot about in season 3 with June and all the decisions she makes of what are going to be the ramifications of these children getting out on this plane. And now we're starting to see what they are. And it's not really a conversation of is it or isn't it worth it. Of course, it's better for the kids to be there, but it's still going to be an event, as we're going to see. It's still a thing, and it's still not easy for anyone involved, as we're going to see further in this episode. And I'm sure we're going to continue to see the ramifications in Gilead of what happens when you get a plane of children out, and how this civil unrest starts to bubble up, and how Gilead will try to squash them down. And it's going to be harsh. And June is at this point accepted, in order to fight back, you might have to die in the process. I think we're going to see that with this conversation that she has at this country club with this girl. But what other choice do you have? Brianna doesn't have another choice in this situation one way or the other. She might not want to fight, but she really doesn't have another choice. She could theoretically surrender herself, but then that's what Gilead wants. And that's how they can continue to proliferate and continue to control, because everyone's afraid to fight back. So it's a decision that everyone has to make for themselves in the moment.
So after, Brianna protests, their safeguardian comes in and he says that a Mayday contact will only talk to June. And June's like, okay, why can't they come here? And he's like, you can leave, she can't. And no one feels any good about June leaving. I would feel terrified over anybody ever leaving. I mean, I have the same anxiety that June had when she woke up and was like, oh my God, my handmaid friends are walking cows out in the fields. Like, shit, that's a lot of anxiety. It's like their safety has been them sticking together. They're stronger when they're together. They're safer when they're together, unless you know June.
I really liked in this scene when she steps out right before she goes, she really hesitates, and it does kind of happen at the same time as Luke's voice does come in. But she hesitates to take that step out, and it's everything I was saying in the last episode of they are in this little box. And she knows she's going to have to venture forth. And she kept mentioning it. And that was like her first step into she gets to go out. But just like the Guardian had said, that's a huge thing for her. That the amount of agency that she's the one who gets to go talk to Mayday because she can. Mayday can't come to her because she can't. The Mayday connection is very much still in a box. And it is a new thing for June to be the one that gets to leave and have that kind of agency to move around like that.
With Luke's voiceover as June's walking out, he says, some of you know my wife. And Luke is doing a presentation. And Rita and Moira are here too. And I liked Rita's dress because it was very close to the color of Nightshade berries. And I was wondering if that meant she was going to be the Nightshade to Fred and or Serena, because I'm still dying to know how much dirt Rita is going to give the ICC in Canada about Fred and Serena. I'm like dying for that. She's got all the dirt.
Well, we have to presume, considering in one of the little blurb that they posted on Instagram, that we do see her interacting with Fred. Fred says, it's good to see a familiar face. And Rita says, I'm not your friend. We can at least presume that she's not going to try to protect him. She also, as she's handing him the picture, she says that, like, effectively says, your family dramas are your own. You guys figure this out. So I don't think that Rita is going to be doing any protecting of either of them by any metric. She might not want to get actively involved, but she's certainly not going to intentionally withhold information. So I like where you're going with that Nightshade reference. It's a nice little metaphor.
It is. This was hard on Luke. I felt so bad for him because he's given his presentation, but he's getting choked up too while he's doing it. And June's a legend even in Canada. Like, she's got some far reach for what she did. I mean, they're giving fundraisers with her as like their, unofficial spokesperson.
We've talked before about how Luke has struggled with finding his sense of purpose up in Canada and finding any sort of direction to take. And I think that now that we see him in front of these people talking, and yes, he's tripping over himself a little bit and he seems a little bit awkward, but it's kind of endearing. in his own way, because he does. It's understood that he has a connection to June. That's why he's doing this. Not that he's necessarily like, peddling for donations. It was really wonderful to watch Luke kind of take some sort of direction, trying to take the mantle in some way to assist with the resistance in his own way.
Yeah, he found a purpose.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that. And I love that he was also like very much willing to understand that the spotlight's not about him. It's about June. It's about Rita. It was really wonderful. And then seeing Moira support him as well, because once Luke was speaking, he had a pause for a second and you could tell that he felt like he was going to start stumbling. And Moira immediately picked up the charge and started clapping to kind of break the tension in the room. And I thought that was wonderful watching her be supportive of him in that moment too.
This is really hard on Rita too. You can tell because when she does, get up to speak, you can tell she's uncomfortable, actually being on stage. But then even after, when she's talking to Moira, it's like she doesn't feel comfortable in her own skin almost. And also, you can tell that she still feels that like continual obligation because Moira thanks her for speaking. And then she says, well, Luke asked me and I couldn't say no. And Moira's like, you can say no to all the things that you want to say no to now, girl. Like, it's okay. And she still has that touch of Gilead to her by saying being free is a gift, and I thank God for it every day and for June. Moira looks kind of chagrined during this whole interaction.
So what I really liked about this episode as a whole was the flashbacks, there's no flashbacks, the jumping between Canada and Gilead. It really is a stark juxtaposition, as it always is, but it's also really interesting seeing Rita, who's fresh out of Gilead, versus Luke and Moira, who have had time to acclimate, have had time to process different things, and are now at different points of processing. And, I don't think Moira's having an easy time just because she's had more time to be out of Gilead. But I think that's what we're seeing here is Rita is so fresh out of Gilead. She knows exactly the kind of peril that June is in as she speaks. So just the fact that she's in any kind of safety, I mean, remember when she kissed the ground? Like, she's still in the throes of that trauma that I'm sure it is hard for her to feel comfortable with everything that's going on just because it is so different. It is an entirely different culture, as we're going to see. She's going to help Asher because she's so much closer to the culture that is so different than everything they're in right now. So there's that issue on top of the fact that she, I'm sure, has survivor's guilt because she knows that June's just an extreme amount of danger. The fact that she stayed, and they kind of keep tripping over it as they're talking about her in the fundraiser, that like, we hope she's still alive, but we don't want to say that she's not. But also like, holy shit, she's in a lot of trouble right now. Like, Rita knows that. Rita knows that if she gets caught, she's going to get killed.
I think that Moira knows that as well, having lived through it. And I like what you're saying, though, about it being much more present for Rita because she is so freshly removed from it. Moira clearly has an understanding of it, and we see that later in the episode when she's talking with Emily. And she's kind of working through a bit of that survivor's guilt to a point. But for Rita, like, Rita is still very much grappling with this new sense of freedom. And Scarlett, like you said, Moira looks chagrined about this. And I think that Moira's kind of struggling with understanding that Rita is still dealing with being indoctrinated. Ultimately, I think watching Rita struggle with reacclimating herself to freedom makes Moira a stronger social servant. And we see that in her interactions with Asher later on, which we can touch on. I thought it was really wonderful watching Moira sort of understand where Rita was coming from and start to process through that. Also, side note, loved that Moira was basically wearing a wives' blue dress. It wasn't that blue, but for Moira, it was. Moira's not a dress-wearing sort. Moira's not a like powdered blue sort of dress sort. So for Moira, this is the closest that we've seen to anything that she would be like that. So I thought it was kind of wonderful watching Moira clap for Luke when he was feeling awkward, be there for Rita when Rita was feeling uncomfortable, like kind of help to, wear the dress and pull the strings a little bit.
Oh, it's interesting because I, surprise, kind of read it differently with Moira. What's happening? I don't know how entirely differently, but I just think What really jumped out at me with her interaction with Rita at the end of the scene, I completely agree that she is definitely experiencing some kind of survivor's guilt. But with Rita, it's curious to me to see what we're going to get from her, because we haven't seen Rita outside of Gilead. So we don't really know what her personality is to begin with. But we knew Moira before Gilead. So we know now that at this point, what jumped out at me in the scene is that Moira and June have kind of flip-flopped from where they were pre-Gilead to where we are now. June has basically said, here, I can't be a mother to this child, so you take my child because I have work to do, which is essentially what Moira did when she had a child and gave it up for adoption so that she could take that money to better her circumstances. She had work to do in other different ways. But that was Moira, was I don't want to be a mother. Not that June's saying I don't want to be a mother. Obviously, she's still saying because she wants to be a mother and all those things. But just that act of I'm going to give up the child because I have other things to do, that wasn't June when we first saw them in the flashbacks. That was Moira. Moira was the give them hell. And June was the let me assist in other ways that are a bit more passive. And so what jumped out at me through the rest of the scene with Moira is that I think she feels, on top of the survivor's guilt, a little bit like she's spinning her wheels. This isn't her brand of resistance. It's not that it's not useful and that she's doing important things and that she's doing them well, but just that I feel like Moira's always taken a more active resistance. And to know that June is still in the throes of that, and she's here placing children in adoption and vetting families and collecting paperwork, it's just not what Moira would have said she saw for herself pre-Gilead.
Moira was the Hellraiser, not June.
Yeah, that quote is what made it jump out for me. You know, I couldn't find the exact quote, but I know Moira said that in the past of give him hell, go raise hell, something to that extent.
Do you think that there's a little bit of envy from Moira then? That June is the one that's getting the attention for raising hell?
Yeah, and that she's still in there doing that fight, and Moira's here to clean up the mess. When I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting later when she says this is June to take the big swings and damn the consequences, and my gut told me that was Moira in the beginning of their relationship. You know, I think if anything, she's seeing more of that, and she doesn't want to be the one cleaning up the mess. She'd rather be in the throes of it, I guess. It just is more Moira.
That was an interesting thing to say, because Moira hasn't ever really seen June take that role of taking the big swings. She wasn't in Gilead for it. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that her chagrin was also about the fact that June did have an opportunity to leave. I'm sure that Rita doesn't have the full story of why exactly June didn't make it on that plane. All she knows is that she didn't get on the plane. So she's probably like, what the hell? And then to know that this was the second time she could have escaped. You know, if things didn't go down exactly the way they did. It's almost like that's going to come up later. I think it has right now for Moira. It's definitely going to come up for Luke later. I think we can pick that up from the trailers.
They're kind of giving a prelude to that as well, because Rita was saying that Gilead has a way of bringing out the worst in people, but in June it brought out the best.
And it makes Moira flinch at that point when she says it, or she has a reaction to it.
Absolutely. And it made Luke have a reaction to it as well. And I genuinely believe that it was not Rita's intention to come across like that. I think it was just more of like being in this incredibly high pressure situation strengthened her and made her into the sort of human being that can inspire others. She just didn't say it in a way that was quite eloquent enough to not get that flinch and that reaction out of both Luke and Moira.
And I think that's what I'm reading as survivor's guilt in Moira, is the fact that June has had an opportunity twice to get out. And she has both times chosen, at least, I mean, the second time we can kind of debate, but no, she really has chosen to stay behind twice now. And Moira, the Hellraiser, who we've known has always seen herself as such, left the first opportunity she got. Actually, the two opportunities she got. She left June at the train station, and then she left her for Canada. So that is how I think she sees it. I'm not saying that that's how she should feel, but I do think that that's what we're seeing play out in her, is that guilt of I got out and here I am, and she both times chose to stay behind and fight.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know this because we haven't gotten to that point of absolution with any of them, but like even Emily says, like, she gave me her kid and she stayed. How crazy is that? Without acknowledging, like, yeah, she, like, no one seems to be acknowledging that Hannah is still in Gilead. So, like, of course she's going to stay. Like, they're all just so focused on Nicole, and they're not focused on, like, the other kid. Like, that's wild to me that no one's correcting anyone by saying, like, of course she stayed. Like, she still has a kid that's there. She's going to do everything she can to try.
Well, that would put Luke in a tough spot if you say that in front of Luke, because he left when he had a kid there.
He did leave when he had a kid there. As far as he knew, they were dead. Like, he had no reason to believe otherwise. He heard, like, gunfire going off. It's a logical conclusion for Luke that, like, yes, it's a logical conclusion for Luke that at least June is dead.
I don't think he thought that she was dead, though, because remember, he really didn't want to leave without her. I'm not saying it's fair to say he left without his kid. I'm just saying that that's the guilt he has because he's in Canada. So saying, like, of course June's gonna stay when he did leave. But remember, he doesn't want to leave. They basically force him to leave. Everyone else he's with, he keeps saying, I'm going back to find my wife and kid. And they're like, no, you're not. We're going to Canada. You can help them from there. He doesn't really have much of a choice in it. So I'm not saying that it's his fault one way or the other. I just think that's the guilt that he feels.
Fair enough. All right. I can see where you're coming from with that.
So after this, June's on the move again, and she has to remain hidden at checkpoints again, and we show up at this nice house, and they're lying, saying that they have a pickup for Commander Keyes. And this is so freaking scary because, again, it's that hiding in places, being on the move scenario where she really is a sitting duck. When she is in a vehicle being driven by somebody else, she is a sitting duck as far as I'm concerned. It really kind of like makes me uncomfortable when she's being transported to places.
And that's a theme that we've seen for 4 seasons
over
now.
And over and over again, yeah. So this Martha grabs her and brings her back to the nicest looking greenhouse I've ever seen. Honestly, this seems to be basically how did she...
Places like this have always been about fantasies. They were built so men could act like country lords. Pretend you're rich for a weekend. Now they're fantasies of a different kind.
It's Jezebel's, the country club edition.
Yeah. This was also prevalent in the antebellum South, especially in New Orleans. They were called fancy girls. They're basically concubines, and honestly, they're just a part of commerce. That was their function within the commerce. Just like here, the handmaids have their own function. All women in both societies serve a function. And then, I was looking up, sexual slavery too in like totalitarian governments. And I was reading that Nazi Germany did the same thing, but they did it for their prisoners. Because they wanted to, this is so wild, they wanted to discourage homosexuality among prisoners, and it was like an incentive thing to increase productivity. So in Ravensbrück concentration camp, there were 132,000 women and children, 20,000 men, and 1,000 adolescent girls from 40 countries at this place that were basically, just kind of funneled in and out of there for that purpose. There were ones for the military too, but that was a whole other thing. I'm sure, high up Nazi officers had their own gig. It's men in power are going to do what men in power do. We already heard the Esther thing. I mean, her husband had a harem. This is totally a place that Fred would dig.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? He would be unhappy.
God, he would act literally like the lord of the country house. That is his shtick. Oh my God, he would thrive here. If only he wasn't in Canada. Fucker. So I have to ask you, when she's being led through the house and we see, there's a woman grinding a mortar and pestle on the side. So obviously drugs are getting them through the day, or they're being used for other way more nefarious purposes. Of that, I have no doubt. And did you see the Jezebel in the chair smoking the cigarette before she opened the door? She was reading a friggin' magazine.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, I had to, oh my God, I had to rewind it twice. I'm like, am I seeing that? Yeah, I'm seeing that. What's up with that?
Oh, that's
I was
funny.
really surprised. And then also, when she makes it into the greenhouse, the blonde woman in the bathrobe, who we find out her name is Daisy, seriously, she reminded me of like a dystopian version of Serena in the greenhouse, if there was a way to make Serena even more dystopian.
Yeah. I know. And you know what? All that made me think of was the fact that I had that thought that June had left her little box. Remember, she really didn't want to be the girl in the box. So she gets to leave. She shows up to meet the Mayday contact, who is in a very Serena-esque, I mean, you can't see a greenhouse and not think of Serena, right? But all I can think of is, oh my God, it's a box. And then I'm like, how did I not realize that entire time that Serena was in her own box? All those times we talk about the fact that June has this room that she can't leave, and it's just this room, and it's this room, and we keep seeing June in a room for now 4 seasons, and she finally now episode 2 gets to leave her room on her own accord. And that whole time Serena's been in a box, and they slap us over the head with the fact that we already know Serena is an abused woman, and we're going to have it reiterated in this episode. But yeah, she was always in a box, Serena, and that's all I see in this episode is exactly what you said, Scarlett, of dystopian Mayday Serena, alternate universe Serena.
That's okay. That was really awesome. Thank you for taking us on that walk, because I don't know, I just never really thought of it that way. And yeah, they were hitting us over the head with it the whole time.
Right?
Guys, but we have talked about that.
I don't remember putting it exactly that way, though.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I don't remember which episode, but we've definitely talked about before where this is like where Serena goes, because it's the only place that she feels that she can genuinely be herself in some capacity. It's the only place that she can have this maternal role, but she also is simultaneously trapped there.
Okay. All right. I do vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I know we talked about it, but not in the same sense of June vehemently says early on in season 2 or 1, I can't remember what it was, where she says, I don't want to be the girl trapped in the box. And then they've been showing us girls trapped in boxes, very literally. For the rest of the seasons, and it's just never occurred to me until now that they're all just very literally trapped in boxes.
I feel like we have talked about it before, but I just can't remember which specific episode, so doesn't matter.
We got a lot of episodes. Again, June, she is a legend even here. Daisy says, I thought you'd be taller, the handmaid that killed Commander Winslow. Where'd you get the knife? And June makes the story even better by saying it was a pen. Right there, that's just an incredible story. Like, forget the 86 kids and the 9 Marthas. The fact that she took out a 200-pound commander with a pen is pretty outstanding.
And the assistance of a statue.
Yes, that statue was
Definitely
fantastic.
didn't hurt either.
That pen, though, like, puncturing along, that was the real champ there. So the Daisy keeps kind of singing June's accolades, and June is just very much like, this is cool, but like, let's cut to the chase. What have you heard? Because I don't think June is thrilled that this person knows that it was her. I imagine that took her off guard. I mean, think about that episode and all the cleanup that they did. And yet everybody in that place, or at least she did, so you have to assume many other people knew that it was June that did that. That's terrifying. And it's legendary. So you know that eventually that's a thing they could visit back on her if Gilead gets a hold of her. But there's things happening now. Like, June has, again, inspired people, because now apparently there's tire slashing that's happening, cutting power lines, blowing up of checkpoints. She's like, I can't believe you did that. And June's like, well, they took my daughter, so do you have a safe house? Cool, let's talk about this, like, safe house situation. Again, like, let's bring it back to the important stuff here. Like, stop stroking me. I need help. But I guess she's got to play the game. And I was taking down her description of where they're going to be. They're going to the Murrows. It's a yellow farmhouse 13 miles west of here, down Highway 34, in a stand of poplars. I've been listening to a lot of Billie Holiday lately, and obviously poplars are the trees mentioned in Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. But poplar is also a symbol of endurance and conquest. And then she mentions the quilt. If you see a quilt hanging on the clothesline, that's important too. Well, that's a hat tip to the Underground Railroad legend, where quilt pieces were arranged to speak in code to escaping slaves, and they can't get June out fast enough. She's like, I have to go, like, right now. When June asks her how she knew about Winslow, she says that she was in Boston and they cleaned house. I was one of the lucky ones. So it sounds like cleaned house means most of the people at Jezebel's are either no longer alive or they were sent to the colonies. Just know that when we're pointing out that there are repercussions for June's actions, like actions that are warranted or not, this is what we're talking about. Pointing out the fact that June has a body count whenever she does something, is not bashing her. It's stating a fact.
There are repercussions to actions.
Yeah, exactly. Those repercussions are often what keep people from doing anything at all. I'm always on team do anything you can, but go into it with the full understanding of your repercussions.
Yeah, and I think in this scene she does. I think in this episode, I don't think in season 3 she always did. I think we're seeing growth from June in understanding her repercussions, but understanding that she is going to take those actions and take those risks anyway, and it's worth it for her. And I know Roxy said in the last episode and again in this episode that she has to accept that not everyone has the same stakes that June has and has come to the same realizations. But I think here that's exactly what we're seeing, is the fact that she wouldn't even look her in the eye when she explained this. It's like June was staring her down the entire time, and the girl, Daisy, wouldn't look June in the eye, just kind of like what you were saying, Scarlett, of her being this legend. Like, she almost couldn't look at her fully directly. But June was staring at her until it got to that point where she told her what happened in the aftermath of Winslow's death and the fact that they all covered it up for her. And she wouldn't look at her, but it didn't change the fact that she continued to ask about the commanders and continued to realize that this is what they do, and this is what she can do as part of Mayday. And she doubles down on being ruthless because there's a bunch of commanders sitting ducks. So at least now we're seeing her think through those actions and do it anyway. It's not like we were saying that she shouldn't do it. It's just that there are repercussions, and there will be for this too, I'm sure.
She can't falter now, because before the issue was that she couldn't keep herself out of trouble every time something was happening. She was very used to taking those repercussions on herself. Then she finds out there are repercussions, unintended repercussions, and now she has all of these people that are absolutely depending on her. So she can't falter. She has to see this through. She can't get wishy-washy. She has to make really difficult decisions. She's going to make decisions that we're going to question, but also we're not living in a totalitarian regime. So who the hell are we to talk? We're just going to speculate about it, though, like a lot.
Right, absolutely. I have two things I want to bring up here. One is I also noticed that that the woman who we find out later, her name is Daisy, isn't looking June in the eye. I like where you're thinking. I like where you're talking about that, where she's seeing June as being such a legend that she's like almost can't bring herself to look at her. But I, of course, took it a different way. I took it as after hearing Daisy say that she was in Boston before, and then after he went missing, they cleaned house and she was one of the lucky ones. I took it as like she couldn't, like, first she didn't want to look at June, because if she looked at June, then she could recognize her. If she analyzed, like if she'd spent too much time looking at her, then if she were to be tortured or anything like that, she could be used for information to try to like pinpoint what she looks like. I also took it as she said that she was one of the lucky ones. She definitely lost some friends in the Jezebel's purge. So there's probably some anger there as well. And she understands that helping June is ultimately what's going to be best for the idea of Mayday as she sees it. It's almost understandable why she wouldn't want to look at June, because there's got to be some level of anger and ergo resentment there that we saved this woman. How many lives did we lose? How many good women who were being tortured in Jezebel's died just to save this woman who I thought was going to be taller?
I understand. Like, I had to keep watching that scene to figure out why there wasn't more resentment, because I thought there would be, but every time I looked for it, I just heard amazement. Like, the way she talks about, Daisy says, all those kids free, I can't believe you did that. And it sounds like true, genuine astonishment. But then June responds with, they took my daughter, and she responds so defensively that I assume there must be some kind of resentment happening in Daisy's voice. I just didn't hear it. Like, I really didn't. She sounded astonished to me, and June acted defensive. I don't know.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think that there was like a level of astonishment too, that she was able to like kind of pull it off.
But I think
Daisy,
June agreed with what you're saying, because June didn't that sound offensive to you when she was like, they took my daughter, I had to do it? And I'm like, she's impressed. She gets it.
I think Daisy's allowed to have a multifaceted response to this, though. I think she's allowed to be in awe of the fact that June was able to orchestrate something that big. I think that she is allowed to be mad because, like, this is the person that we saved, and all those women that were at Jezebel's were purged because of it, or sent off to the colonies, or whatever happened to them. And I think that she's also allowed to be like a bit like cautious as well. I mean, she hasn't survived this long in Gilead without being cautious.
I love what you were saying about her trying to...
About her not looking at June too much because otherwise she'd be able to recognize her.
Yeah, that had never occurred to me, that's why she wouldn't look her in the face, because then she wouldn't have the information when she's being tortured.
Also, the other thing I wanted to bring up, Daisy, really? We have another Daisy to contend with now? Another Daisy? We couldn't think of another fucking name.
But she's a daisy in a greenhouse.
I know. It's very darling. I totally get it. Like, it is perfect. It's also just like, God damn it, there's another Daisy. So now we have to clarify which Daisy we're talking about in the future.
I also think she's really cool, so I hope that we'll see her character again, but I don't think that we will. But I thought she was very charismatic. So June is like continuing with the questioning and stuff. And apparently, like, all of these commanders are going away at the end of the weekend. They're going to Chicago because there's a new offensive. Wasn't Nick headed to Chicago? That does place, like, perhaps some worry on June because she has to assume that's where Nick is. And her man's out there fighting, and there's this new thing going down. And June's like, well, hold up. You know what? You're, like, just here. Like, why don't you guys just do something? You're going to be, like, pretty much left alone. We're going to have, like, a minimal military presence. Like, take this to your advantage. She doesn't really think that they would do that for them. And June's like, hold up. We are Mayday. They're people just like us. She keeps driving home that point that Mayday is everybody. If you're fighting with us, if these are the things that you want, then you are Mayday. As being part of Mayday, you have to make things happen yourself sometimes.
I know, and I think that's so cool because going back to the book or all the way back to season 1, that was June's thing in the beginning, and season 1 was that fixation on how do I become part of Mayday? What is Mayday? Who is Mayday? And now for her to just be declaring it as fact of we're all Mayday.
Yeah, end of story. So the next scene, someone, and by someone I mean Serena, is getting their fingerprints scanned. Remember, like, how hard we looked at this in the YouTube video? And everybody's like, look at the pinky, look at the pinky. And I'm like, oh, yeah, wow, that is super obvious. We're all like, who's getting fingerprinted?
Whoopsies.
Somebody. It might be Serena.
Who could it possibly be?
What gave it away? Oh, man.
So, can't see the forest for the woods sometimes.
Oh, it was funny, though. So the doctor who's taking notes on, Serena's visit asks her, did he do that? And Serena, not directly. It's an appropriate punishment under Gilead law. And then there's more inspection. Did your husband ever sexually assault you? And she says no. And it's like, yeah, she just helped him sexually assault others. She admits that he frequented a brothel, and they're going to be doing an STD panel and a genital swab. And this is like very invasive, and I'm confused by the timing. But then when I understood why they were doing it, because they're trying to build a case against Fred, I'm like, okay, I got it. I just wasn't sure where it was coming from until the conversation, after with the attorney. I was like, was Canada doing this now? She's been here for like, what, a month or something? Like, and they're just doing this now, but now it makes sense as we got into the next scene.
You know what I couldn't stop thinking about as I watched Serena go through this was that it reminded me so much of how June would act in this situation, or how we've seen June hold just a little bit of pride in all the ways that Gilead and the Red Center would try to take away her humanity, and she would just hold her head up just a little bit. And I feel like that's what Serena was doing. Like, it's obviously a very humiliating situation. It's very dehumanizing for Serena. And it's something that we've seen a lot of women in Gilead go through, but we haven't seen Serena go through something like this before, something so physical. And she just held herself in a way that I could see June holding herself the same way. And it's interesting when we see shades of Lydia and June, and then I didn't mention it, but I saw shades of Eden and Esther, and then we're seeing shades of June and Serena, and we continue through this episode. Everyone just gets a little muddy when they're put into different circumstances.
Absolutely. I'll agree with you on the June and Serena thing, especially too, because they're two sides of the same coin. Like, June is burning down the world to get her child back. Serena burnt the world down to take someone else's. Very similar. Still on Team June, though.
Oh, of course.
But it's interesting now to see that Serena is in the box, and I think this episode makes it really evident from scene to scene how they really double down on the fact that she is locked up. She is in prison. You'll hear the door slam from one cut to another, and it's just one room after another, one box after another. Even the way that they take the pictures of her from all the different angles, it boxes her in. When they have the conversation with the lawyer and Tuello, she's like a caged animal in the corner. They're blocking the only exit she has. They're really doubling down on the imagery of the fact that she is caged in, locked up, and as we're gonna see, kind of being put in a corner. She doesn't want to take the legal strategy that they're telling her she needs to take.
And it kind of looks like a glorified greenhouse that they have her in.
Sure does.
But she can't go out to that space.
Behavior that's indicative of any sort of victim of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological. When the doctor asks her, are there any other instances of physical abuse? Her first response is no. And then she says yes. When the doctor said, is this another appropriate punishment? It's not that simple. That right there was like, it's such a classic line for the victim of any sort of abuse to say, is that it's not that simple. Like it doesn't matter like whether or not it's black and white. There's always some sort of excuse or reason that can be given, even if that person that has been abused understands logically. There's still the emotional aspect of it, and there's still the healing that needs to happen. Sort of like what we saw with Rita earlier, where she was giving still giving the placations. She's a victim of psychological abuse. It's going to take some time to break that cycle. Same thing with Serena, where we see this. We see Serena snapping back at Tuello, where she's biting at him for serving her the warrant for the arrest. And like, well, if you hadn't done that, like, Serena, you're displacing the blame in the wrong direction, because she understands that if she places that blame on either Fred or herself, that it's going to cause her severe psychological damage. And like Tuello tries to call her on it by saying, I don't understand why you're giving him the benefit of the doubt. And she's like, oh, I'm going to get him to drop the claim. And like, it's just over and over again, like really reiterating to me that she is the victim of abuse. She has also been the perpetrator of some massive abuses, and that cannot be ignored nor forgiven. But she has been abused herself, and by what you two are pointing out, where she's just being or they're visually putting her into this box that looks like her sad, decrepit greenhouse, it's really doubling down on the fact that she might be physically out of Gilead, but she's still entrenched in that mental world. Like,
absolutely. And I think it's helpful for us because we are fresh off of a season 2 rewatch where we see a lot of the most obvious Serena and Fred abuse, because in season 3 they kind of have this reconciliation, and there's still a shit ton of mental abuse that Fred is projecting out always because it's Fred, but a lot of that physical abuse and the most in-your-face mental abuse happens in season 2, which we had just seen. So I think if we had been a little bit more removed from season 2, it wouldn't have been as in your face. Like, we already knew that Serena is definitely an absolute abused woman, and this is verbiage that is going to come from classic abused woman situation, especially in the timeline that Serena's in. But on top of that, I think that we've always seen Serena try to appear like she has sovereignty over her life. She never wants to look vulnerable, even though we knew as a viewer that she has been oppressed and has been abused in Gilead. She never wanted anyone else to know that. That is classic sign of an abused woman. But it's also something that Serena is absolutely not comfortable with, showing that vulnerability. And I think she's especially not comfortable with showing it in front of Tuello. Like, that seems to be something that she really doesn't want to be put in this position to have to justify her life with Fred in front of Tuello. And it was interesting the way they kind of took their opposite sides in that window. And he says, I don't know why you continue to make excuses for him. And she says that it's because she knew him before, but then she marches right across and gets right up in his face. And do you know who that is? It's June. Like, guys, that's so June, right? Did that jump out at you? She is absolutely just trying to take any kind of agency that she has in this situation. She has 2 men who control her. Fred controls her psychologically. Like, it's obvious that she doesn't want to go have this conversation with him because he still has that power over her. And Tuello has power over her too. And for her to have to take on that June role of, let me smile at you and talk to you the way I can so that I can get out of you what I want, which is to have this meeting alone with Fred, even though that gives her her own trepidation. It made me think that, what if Tuello is just another side of the coin of Fred, like a Gilead as elsewhere of Fred? Because it was just made very evident to us that Serena is a pawn for him, or could entirely be a pawn for him, in the case against Fred. And if she's being used for Tuello's own means, the same way that Fred has always used her for his own means, then she is once again stuck between two men and their control over her, and she's not going to have any more agency than what June had in Gilead, and that is how she is going to behave in this situation. So they are really two sides of the same coin.
That's a cool way of looking at it. When Tuello looks at her, he looks at her with pity. It's always there. And I think she hates that. She really doesn't want to be seen as someone to be pitied, because that really chips away at that I'm a strong Gilead woman exterior that she always tries to have. She never wants to seem like she's as powerless as she is. And Tuello is always just holding that up to her face like a mirror, much in the way that June did all throughout season 2 and into season 3. She never stopped. So Tuello does that too. With Tuello, like, I feel like they do have some weird connection though, so I think it like bothers her even more. I just feel like they have good chemistry, not necessarily any kind of romantic chemistry, but just we've enjoyed their back and forth since they first met in Smart Power.
Yeah. But I think we enjoy Fred and Serena's back and forth sometimes too. I enjoyed their back and forth in this episode. I think it's that kind of chemistry. I don't know if it's a good chemistry. The more I think about Tuello, the more I think he is absolutely just a Canadian/American version of Fred. I don't know. We'll see. It might be unfair, but I'm wondering if he is just entirely self-motivated.
I think that you make a really solid argument. I totally see where you're coming from. I agree with you, but I'm going to play devil's argument because that's what we do here.
I'm on the fence, so go ahead. Give me the other side.
The one thing that jumps out at me for why Tuello might not be the same as Fred in that manipulative sense is that, I mean, Serena does call him on that too by like being like, oh, like this is the agenda you're trying to push with these cases, is that Tuello tries to understand Serena, because you never hear Fred say, explain this to me. You never hear Fred say, like, I'm not sure why you're saying this. But with Tuello, in this scene specifically, he even says, I don't understand why you're giving him the benefit of the doubt. Like, he's asking her for an explanation. And because he's openly admitting that he doesn't understand her motivations here. And Fred would never.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Fred always feels like he is 17 steps ahead of everything that Serena is doing, and that he's got her fucking number pegged. And Tuello's just like, give me something here. Like, Fred, like Tuello for me, like, I totally see where you're coming from, but this is the one point like that I'd like, maybe like he does have like this, like a different human compassion towards her. Like, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Oh, and then also Tuello, like, when Serena says that she's going to get Fred to drop the claim, Tuello doesn't push any further. He doesn't say, silly girl, don't you understand what's happening here? Or any other sort of, like, manipulative twisting the way that Fred would. He just says, okay, I'll see to it. And, like, organize it. And, like, in that regard, sort of gives her a chance to have some sort of, like, sovereignty and some sort of decision-making skills for herself. Like, reinstated.
I completely see what you're saying there, and how that could be Tuello in that situation. But it just brings up Fred and June to me. It's just, okay, anything you want, my little plaything, who's going to be a means to some end. I'm not saying that it's the same sexual thing with Tuello, but I just think he really, I mean, everything we've seen from him is that Serena is absolutely a piece of the puzzle that he needs for taking down Gilead. And he seems to certainly treat her that way, at least to some extent, and I think she realizes that. But she is using she's using anything that she can within this situation to control any part of it. And it just reminds me so much of June, which is so cool.
See, I kind of read him just leaving it with the okay in a totally different way. What we've seen so far in the last 2 scenes is Serena trying to downplay what she's been through by making excuses or by labeling it as something different. She does the same thing right into her room when she's talking with her attorney and Twello, and he says that he doesn't understand why she's defending him. And it's because when you're in it and you can't see it and you try to rationalize in any way you can, so all of this hurts less, because the reality of what the very simple fact that she is in an abusive relationship, and she knows that's exactly what it is, but she's in denial and she can't acknowledge it, because when you acknowledge it, it's even more real and it's even more painful. So it's kind of a protective measure. And many of us have been in situations where we have a friend who is in an abusive relationship. And if you can see it, I mean, sometimes we don't know the abuse is happening. That's also terrible. But when you have someone close to you who's in that type of relationship and you see what it does to them, and yet they stay, because you can't make somebody leave. They have to figure it out on their own. And after you go through that after a while with that person who you're like, you got to leave, like when you're there for them and you're talking and stuff, and they still make the same decision to stay over and over again. This is kind of what Serena was doing with Fred. She thought that she was going to give it one last try, like, that she can still work her wifely magic on him and talk to him and appeal to his good side, just like she's tried to do in the past, because that's what's worked in the past. And Twello is just like, okay, I don't know why you're bothering. Okay, sure, because what can you say anymore except for okay, because you've been down this road with them. And so I feel like that's kind of what Twello has been witnessing. And he's like, well, clearly I can't tell you any different. It's plain, it's right in front of you. And you are still thinking that somehow you're going to have control over this. She doesn't. It's fucking Fred. And then also at the end, the mirror shot, what did you think of that? That kind of reminded me of season 3 with Fred and Serena in Household when they were staying at the Winslows and they were having that conversation in the bedroom. So that's what I thought of when you mentioned that, like, Fred and Twello being 2 sides of the same coin kind of thing. I was like, oh, there's that thing that they're doing that I always need you guys to explain to me because I don't understand mirrors.
I just felt like she couldn't look herself in the mirror at that point, because I think she was definitely nervous to go talk to Fred. But I also think she mostly doesn't want to face the truth, which is that she was in an abusive relationship. She was vulnerable. She is going to have to go put herself in this position again. And I think she's feeling vulnerable, but she doesn't want to admit it. So if she looks over, she's going to see herself, and she doesn't want to face any of that truth yet. She can't even face the truth that she deserves to be arrested. She puts that blame on Twello, which I understand in a certain context. It might just be a different thing. But so far of her just saying, Twello arrested her, and now it messes up his case, and therefore he needs this motion to dismiss because of this abuse, and she's not comfortable with any of that. So it could just be that she doesn't want to even have the motion to dismiss. But to me, it jumped out at me that, like, wow, Serena, you're blaming the fact that Twello arrested you, when in reality is you raped someone and therefore got arrested. Like, it's not like she hasn't had any of that reckoning yet.
Exactly what I was saying earlier, is that, like, this is something that victims of abuse will tend to do as well. They'll shift blame away from themselves as well as away from their as well as their abuser, as a defense mechanism. And Twello is the closest thing to an interloper into their relationship. Serena's not acknowledging that she's the one that dragged Fred's ass across the border to Canada, but Twello's the one to blame, because Twello's the one that arrested Fred, and then he arrested Serena after everything that she was trying to do. She's just trying to reunite with her daughter. Why is she being vilified? It's all playing into this into the same rule of someone who's in an abusive situation will continually make excuses for not only their abuser's behavior, but their behavior in regard to their abuser. Absolutely agree with everything you two were saying. Like I said, I was just playing devil's advocate before with 12.
No, but you were right. That was a good point.
It's a good point, but I don't think it's the right point.
Yeah.
I think ultimately
it's hard to tell. I think that's the hard part about so early when we only have these like couple of scenes. It's hard to get a real feel for what anyone's motivations are, because we don't fully have a grasp on the entire situation. It was like the scene we were talking about earlier with Serena we didn't even know why that intake was going on the way it was until we found out that this is what her lawyer strategy is. So it's early, and I think it's fair to play all sides of how we perceive things because it's just early. There's a lot of scene setting that's still to happen.
We also are prone to fits of exploring things exhaustively ad nauseum, and if we didn't do that with this scene, we would be doing ourselves and our listeners a disservice.
I'm obviously the most concise and deliberate person when I speak.
We all are.
So the next scene, we meet Moira's new girlfriend. So this is cool. Emily and Moira work together now, and they work together placing kids. I can't think of two better coworkers. This is kind of awesome. I would like there to be a sitcom of just these two because I feel like it would be great. Moira's like, well, at least they're here. It's better than there. And then the girlfriend comes in and Moira has to break off dinner plans. And I don't know what it is about her girlfriend. I didn't like her at all in this scene. The second scene where we meet her, I liked her a lot better. But this one, I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't know what it is. It was just a vibe. I didn't really like her, but Moira is smitten.
That's all I needed.
Yeah.
I
was very warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, I just remember thinking that Moira was so happy, and that made me so happy. So I'm like, okay, I approve.
Absolutely. It was nice to see Moira just be a little a Twitter about it. She was sort of stumbling over her words. You could tell that she was a bit blushing. She was bashful. It was really wonderful to see Moira in that sort of position. I can see why you wouldn't like her, Scarlett, because I think that she came right into Moira's workplace and immediately was like, kiss, smooch. Oh, I get to see her with her mouth guard in, and like just being very cheeky and almost a little like, if this were a man coming through the door and saying these sort of things, we'd be like, what kind of machismo bullshit is this? We have it coming from Moira's girlfriend, who is physically larger than Moira. It definitely comes across as like this sort of masculine energy that I think that, again, if it were a man like doing this, we would have been very off put by it. But because it's making Moira happy, we're just like, cool, this is good.
Yeah, that's the thing. I have to remember that this is our first introduction to her. This is not Moira's first introduction. And Moira seems like she's totally okay with this whole thing.
Emily, for a moment, didn't, though. And we've talked in the past about how we wanted to see more interactions between Moira and Emily and how Moira would almost like help to be a guide for Emily to make her feel a bit more comfortable with herself and be a bit more comfortable with all the atrocities that have happened to her in Gilead, having the same experience as her, being a gay woman coming out of this turmoil. So I think at first Emily was a bit disarmed to see Moira like moving into another relationship and being comfortable with that, because we still don't. I mean, this is our first time seeing Emily in season 4. We don't really have any answers as to what's happening with her and her wife and what that relationship is like. This little nuance of Emily seeming slightly uncomfortable kind of hints to me that maybe things are not like sunshine and flowers for Emily. But she is able to put that aside and share a little bit of share a snicker with Moira, poke a little bit of fun at her in her own way of saying like, hey, good for you.
Emily does seem more confident and comfortable in her own skin again. I think the last time that we've seen her, the last episode we saw her, right, was, okay, so there was May Day, and then before that when she got arrested with Moira, and that whole thing was her trying to, like, transition into Canada and just get used to being a regular person again, but a regular person with heaps of trauma. And now she just seems pretty light. And that was cool. Like, she was noticeably lighter.
Yeah, she found her groove a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought it was very endearing that Moira, instead of ducking out of work early, she canceled dinner plans to stay and help Emily. Just a hunch here. I feel like the Moira of the before times would have been like, I'm gonna get laid. Cover me. And even Emily was just like, no, you should go have dinner. And Moira's like, no, we have work to do here. Understanding that the work that she has to do for helping to place these kids is extremely important, but also she's not going to leave Emily high and dry. So it was nice to see that bit of camaraderie.
And I could be reading into it too much, but I do think that she was a little bit cognizant of the fact that Emily doesn't have someone to go home to. That might be that same situation. Like, we haven't really seen what has become of Emily's outside of work life. And she says specifically to her, I'm going to stay until you're ready to go home. which wasn't exactly until we finish all the work. It was more of like, when you're ready to go, then we'll both call it quits. And it was just an interesting turn of phrase, because I am curious what's going on with Emily and what was her wife's name? So, yeah.
Back at the farm.
Right? June's getting all sorts of pushback from her friends about this Jezebel situation because she's taking this on and Alma is not down. Like, she just wants to go. And honestly, how does anyone sleep in Gilead? Like, I would have died so long ago from the toll anxiety would have taken on my sleep. I would, like, seriously, 6 months tops, fucking done, because I just wouldn't sleep. And so all of these people are absolutely amazing. And June's like, well, you know, I think they deserve to be freed. And Alma's like, is that it? Or do you want to just kill a bunch of commanders? And I'm over here like, why can't it be both? Come on. What's wrong with either of these situations? The Jezebels is like a bonus. All these women being freed, that's a bonus. That's the motivation, but it's also the bonus because you have to go after the commanders first. Like, cool. And then they question how she's going to do it, and they're frustrated because they want more of a plan. Brianna is definitely feeling prickly. And June's like, I don't know right now. Like, it's hard being the answer person. Like, give the girl a second to think. She just walked in the door.
But sometimes even the answer people need a moment to collect themselves and look at things from 30,000 feet. They can't have an answer instantaneously. It's that expectation of this superhuman ability of June that they think that she has everything planned out. And, like, they've been present for it. They know that, like, they have to go step by step. But even, like, we see this with Esther. We see it with Alma. We see it over and over again that everyone seems to anticipate that June has everything planned out so well in advance. And it's like no one else seems to be acknowledging that, like, you have to go with what you have at the moment. And then Esther enters the room and, boy, she pulls a real Serena here. Just completely kills the mood. You see that wife's blue come through the door and conversation comes to a screeching halt and all of the joy seems to be sucked out of the room. That was quite powerful for such a young lass to be able to pull that off.
Oh, she is really, really outstanding. She's just so fierce. I love that she can command a room with her presence. She's all of like 2 inches big and she just has so much power behind her. And, you know, June has to reassure her too. Like, you know, I'm going to take care of it because Esther does not look convinced. And she leaves. And then June follows her and they go in the back to like the herb room. She reassures Esther, who's cooking up something, and tells her that they're going to be leaving, and Esther's not happy. Like, because, I mean, surely June must have thought that this was going to be a thing. She wants to go. I'm sorry, this is kind of like your substitute Hannah now. Like,
right?
Esther's got to go with her. You.
Right? I'm glad you felt that way, too.
Other way.
Yeah. I was very surprised when I realized that this was a conversation that actually needed to happen instead of just an assumption as we move forward.
Right? I was like, I mean, I don't know why. I don't understand the hesitation. I understand that she's young. I understand that she's kind of untried. But you know what? You had her kill her abuser. I think she's ready. Let's just fucking bring her on the team, June. I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. And also, like, you did say I love you too, Banana. Granted, she was talking to Hannah, but you said it in response to her saying I love you. Like, this kid's bound to you now.
Yeah. You know what it is? It's that typical oh my God, I totally understand what's happening here. She really is having a parent and child moment because sometimes your kid wants an answer from you and they want that answer really bad and they want a certain kind of answer and you can't give them that certain kind of answer because you either don't know or you don't have the resources or you don't care or you're just straight up like, no, but goddamn it, I don't really want to tell you no because I don't want to continue this conversation. I know you know what this is like, Marjorie. So June is just like, she comes up with this really inadequate response of it's not safe where they're going. Just to try to see if it'll shut her up. And she can't even look at her when she says it because she knows it's bullshit. And Esther's like, it's not safe anywhere. Like, it hasn't been safe in her own home for God knows how long. Like, that's the reason you're going to give? You can't keep these children safe. It's not a thing that you can do anymore. And at this point, I don't know. Do you even consider her a child anymore because of what she's been through? I mean, she is, because she's still, her brain still isn't developed in a lot of different ways, nor is her body, but still, like, she's been through some seriously adult shit. I'm pretty sure she can handle going to Chicago. She's not going to get a break here.
She's not any worse than Brianna, who doesn't want to fight. I mean, they're two sides of different coins, but at the same time, they're all Mayday, whether they want to fight or not. So, yeah. But I do think that that's a point I hadn't thought about, that's exactly what's happening with this mother-daughter, especially teenage daughter relationship. Of course, she knows the answer she's getting to. But I did pick up on the fact that she couldn't even look her in the eye as she said, it's not safe where we're going, as if that's an adequate response when everyone in the room knows it's not.
It's the equivalent of because I said so.
Yeah, and it's mostly just like, I'm still working out the details. Can you just give me another minute? Like, I just don't want to have this conversation right now. But yeah, I completely agree. That's a good point.
But they're going to have to do something about that commander. And Esther looks up. And so does June. And there are leaves drying above. And June is picking up what she's putting down immediately. She says, have you been poisoning him? And Esther's like, you learn things on a farm. And she's cooking up something good. And then she leans in and she says, can you teach me how to make more? I just really love how she said it. It was so school teacher. It was awesome.
It was, right? I agree.
Yeah. I really, really dug that. So my travels into how to play with Nightshade was pretty cool. So deadly Nightshade is related to the potato, tomato, eggplant family of plants. It's highly toxic, contains scopolamine, which means the person who ingests it will trip their balls off before they die. Its other name is belladonna. I've definitely heard that name way before I've heard of scopolamine, nightshade, anything. Its other names also include devil's berries, death cherries, naughty man's cherries. All right. And it can take only 10 to 20 of the berries to kill an adult. A single leaf can be fatal, and King Duncan I of Scotland killed an army of Danes with it. It's very elegant.
In the Hunger Games, when they potentially eat those berries of Nightlock, it's a hybrid of nightshade and hemlock. Is what the author was presumably going for, based on what I read.
I will say, don't put these friggin' berries in a cobbler. Don't do that.
Unless you're going to give them to your commander.
Yeah, so unless you're going to make a commander pie.
I love that when June asks in that sort of teacher sense that you two said that, can you teach me how to make more? Esther, I think she automatically already knows what June's going to say, because she responds with, we're going to need a lot. And this goes back to what you were saying before, is like, can we even consider Esther a child at this point? Like, originally she was very much like, what's next? What's the next move? She's hungry to be part of Mayday. And with this, she has that sort of epiphany moment. She's like, oh, this is how I can be useful. I know exactly what we're doing here. Yes, let me show you. But I love that she like immediately knew what June was on about.
Yeah, I think that she reminds me so much of Eden in just that like teenage tenacity of like, I'm just going to put everything I have into whatever it is that suits me best. And it's not the same thing for Esther and Eden, obviously, but Eden threw herself into just trying to be the best Gilead wife she could be. And it came off as like really obnoxious, but it's that same tenacity that Esther has here of like, let me be part of Mayday.
I feel like every time we're surprised by like Esther or Eden, I like look at my own kids and I'm like, no, that's exactly how they kind of are. They are very eager, and sometimes they have way more energy than you feel like dealing with. Other times they're complete sloths, but when they want to when they're persistent, when they care about something, they care about something. And for an adult, you're just like, oh God, just slow your roll, please. Exactly like June has been through this whole episode. Like, everybody calm the fuck down. Mommy just walked in the door.
Yes, so true.
Mommy will go back to work if you don't stop, which she does. This all translates really well for me. So while they're talking, June's like, when did you start doing this? And apparently her Martha taught her. And Esther's like, I didn't do this soon enough because Keyes is not a good man. And she doesn't think there are good men in Gilead. And June says, I think there are good men everywhere. Even here, it's just complicated. Gilead makes it really hard to be good. And I'm like, this poor girl needs June so much. They can't leave her. She can't leave her.
And I did think it was a little foreshadowing to the appearance of Nick at the end when June kind of doubled down on there's good men everywhere, even in Gilead. But you know what really jumped out at me first, not knowing what was coming at the end, was the fact that Good Guardian didn't get any credit in Esther's book. Come on. She knows there is at least one good man in Gilead because I really like Good Guardian and I have seen nothing but good things from him. So she should at least acknowledge that.
Yeah,
no?
right?
That's a very good point. Yeah. Gone too soon.
Rest in peace.
Yeah. Did we ever get his name?
Not us. Someday we will,
Sometimes.
when the episodes actually come out.
Yeah.
It's just Good Guardian for me. I don't want to know his name.
In our rewatch a few weeks from now.
Yeah.
Then we're going to know who we're talking about.
Somebody want to think about rewatch. That's something we would do. I know.
We'll put a footnote in.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So I think that's a good spot for us to take a break. When we come back, we are going to jump into the epic showdown between Serena and Fred in a church, and then discuss the back half. So thanks for listening so far.
Peace.